Hello, and welcome to my constructive analysis project about the Spanish language. My name is Eric Bergen, and I will be moderating this presentation. Today, we will be discussing background information concerning the Spanish language, the linguistic features of the language, cultural norms that speakers of Spanish have, and some tips and tricks for teaching Ls that speak Spanish. Spanish originated from Vulgar Latin. Vulgar Latin was developed when the Roman army invaded the region that is now present-day Spain and introduced its language to the natives living in the area. From here, the Romans were pushed out of the land by the Moorish invasion, and by the year 715 AD, the Moors had gained control while introducing their language, Arabic, and the culture to the people living here. Later, the Christians started regaining control of the area and introduced their language, Castilian. By the year 1492, the Moors were pushed out of the country and Christians had taken control. Castilian was made the official language of Spain, though it had originally only been spoken in northern and central Spain. Andalusian was spoken in southern Spain and was more heavily influenced by Arabic than Castilian, although several thousand words in Spanish have Arabic roots or influence in them. Upon the Spanish conquest of the Americas and even in Africa, the Castilian dialect was brought to the cultural and administrative hubs, along with the use in government positions. Places like Mexico City, Potosi, and Lima were considered hubs and had very close ties with Hispania. Argentina and many ports and places in South America lost this connection but decided to speak the Andalusian dialect of Spanish. The United States going to war with both Spain and Mexico caused much conflict, but also spread the culture in the last 200 years. The Mexican-American War of 1865 forced thousands of Mexicans to become American citizens and isolated them from their Mexican comrades just hundreds of miles away. Due to this, a new culture was born, and with that, American English influenced the way that these people spoke. Even further, the Spanish-American War allowed the U.S. to gain influence and power over places that Spain had formerly controlled, like Cuba and Puerto Rico, where the U.S. significantly impacted the culture and language. Due to the adoption of such places becoming territories of the U.S. saw an influx of immigrants, both legal and illegal, from Puerto Rico and eventually Central and South America. Before we discuss the Spanish linguistic features, some fun facts about Spanish and the Spanish language are that it's the second most spoken language in the world. 21 countries have adopted it as their official language, and it goes by two names. It is called Español or Castellano, due to the Castilian dialect from which influences it. Spanish is also a very poetic language, and due to this, when a sentence is translated from English to Spanish, the length of the sentence grows by about 15% in length, if not more. Finally, within the next 40 to 50 years, approximately half of the U.S. population will be able to speak Spanish. Understand the impact that this language has and the way that it impacts culture can be a valuable tool for any educator. Phonological differences are vast when it comes to Spanish and English. For the 5 vowels in Spanish, there are only 5 vowel sounds, versus in English there can be upwards to 14 depending on the dialect. Further, both English and Spanish have 15 consonants, but Spanish has 5, which are unique to its own language, and English has 9. Below is a list of a few differences between Spanish and English. One thing I would like to draw attention to in the diagram below is an example which it gives. It says that the U is not pronounced unless it is written. This is important because this can lead to misunderstanding of the U in English, and trying to pronounce and use literary tools in order to decipher, chunk, or segment words with the letter U in them can be difficult. Further, I think it is important to note that Spanish is a syllabic language, which means that the syllable falls within or between words. Due to this, many people think that Spanish is spoken extremely fast. This, however, is not true. and English and Spanish have two different syllabic differences. Pronunciation, speaking, and reading out loud can be three major errors that Ls with Spanish as their L1 can encounter. Below is a list of sounds that Ls will have to learn before they can pronounce a word properly. Spanish, for example, does not have the A, like an 8 sound. The phonological differences can be a major source of error for our Ls if they are not addressed or taught properly. Other differences that Spanish speakers do not have inside their language is the sh, and f consonant digraphs. Morphology is the smallest unit of meaning in a word. Spanish relies very heavily on this because it really impacts the meaning of the entire sentence. For example, if we look at the word jugar, which means to play in Spanish. This word, unlike its English counterpart which can be applied to any situation, can only be applied to playing a game or an activity. If I wanted to play guitar, I would use the verb tocar, which means to play or to touch. In the first person, we have juego, which means I play. This can be altered based off of the person who is playing, juega, or he plays, the number of people playing, jugamos, or we play, the tense, jugaré, or I will play, and the voice, or how the action is being carried out. Juego el videojuego. I play the video game. El videojuego fue jugado por mí. The video game was played by me. After looking at these two examples, you can really start to see how poetic Spanish is and how the individual parts really impact the whole. Syntax is the next part of the language which is important for an educator to understand. The sentence structure in Spanish relies heavily on the verbs and how they are presented to the audience. Spanish has these inverted sentences like we just discussed a minute ago. Another major change from Spanish to English is that in Spanish, the adjective in a sentence follows the noun. In English, we say, the red car is in the narrow street. But in Spanish, that sentence would be, el coche rojo está en la calle estrecha. This can present an issue for Ls when they first start encountering this, and educators should not be surprised if this is an issue that they see is common. Semantics studies the multiple meanings of words, and in English we may confuse our Ls because of the lack of specificity in our words. One example of this would be the word love. In Spanish, there are two words for love, amar and quiero. In the examples I highlight, you realize that there is a type of relationship that needs to be established with a person, which decides which verb the person uses. A better example of this in English might be the word crash. Does crash mean a market crash, an automobile accident, or what? Teaching semantics and understanding this will help Ls. And without teaching the importance of semantics and the multiple meanings of words in their context and in their cultural situations, Ls can sometimes be confused. Pragmatics is the way in which two people communicate through context. I've included a few examples of looking at this through a cultural lens. In cultures where Spanish is the dominant language, it is seen that one should start a conversation off on a more personal note. Spanish speakers also tend to communicate with their hands more in conversation, and children will not verbally interact with adults the same way they do with their friends or people their own age. This is contrary to how educators raised in our US dominant society are, because it is seen as a sign of disrespect when children avoid talking to the adults around them. Another important aspect of the Spanish language is the accents which it utilizes. In Spanish, there are 5 vowels that contain accents: A, E, I, O, U. They are used to emphasize or add stress to syllables, such as with the word teléfono, where the accent is placed on the third vowel to the end. Further, Accents are used to show the difference between a question and statement. ¿Qué es tu color favorito? Which is your favorite color? Qué raro. That is strange. Further, accents are used in Spanish to change the subject or the tense of a verb. Mando una carta. I send a letter. Mando una carta. He or she sent a letter. If you look closely, you can see that the O is stressed when you need to conjugate the verb in the él, ella, usted form of the verb. Finally, accents are also used in order to distinguish between homonyms in a sentence. Tu and tú are two famous homonyms that mean your and you in Spanish and are used constantly in a conversation. Tú comes tu comida uses these accents in order to show that the us are different and needs to be stressed or unstressed.